Story 1: The Amputation Enthusiast. The Craigslist ad was as peculiar as it was unsettling. Help wanted, $1,000 for an hour's work. No experience needed. Serious inquiries only. The post, buried in the depths of the gigs section, had a strange appeal to it. It promised easy money but came with an ominous twist that stopped most people from clicking. The details, once revealed, were almost too bizarre to believe. The ad explained that the job was to assist the poster, who referred to himself only as Cash, in amputating his leg. Yes, his leg. Written with a darkly humorous flair. The ad made light of what most would consider a nightmarish proposition. "Don't worry," it said. "I'll coach you through the whole thing. I've practiced." The contact email was equally absurd: cashtocutoffmyleg@aol.com. It was enough to make anyone believe it was a joke. Yet something about the detailed description suggested otherwise. Curiosity got the better of me, with equal parts morbid fascination and disbelief. I sent a short, cautious email. "Is this real?" I asked, half hoping for no reply. Cash responded almost immediately, his tone polite and matter-of-fact. He assured me it wasn't a joke, reiterating that he was dead serious about removing his right leg below the knee. He explained that this was something he'd been planning for years and promised to compensate anyone willing to help with a cool $1,000. The idea seemed insane. No, it was insane, but I couldn't shake the urge to know more. Against my better judgment, I replied again, asking why he wanted to do such a thing. Cash's reply was long and unsettling. He shared his backstory with unnerving honesty, painting a vivid picture of a man whose life had been consumed by a singular, gruesome obsession. It all began when he was a child. He'd witnessed a neighborhood boy lose his leg in a car accident and, instead of feeling pity, he felt envy. "It was like something clicked in my brain," he wrote. "I didn't see a victim. I saw someone special. Someone with a story no one else could match." From that moment on, Cash became fixated on the idea of amputation, not as a tragedy, but as a transformation. He recounted how, over the years, he had researched every aspect of self-amputation. His emails were littered with medical terms and references to obscure forums where others like him shared their stories. "It's not a fetish," he insisted, though his explanations did little to make his fixation less disturbing. When I hesitated to reply further, Cash upped the ante. "I understand if you think I'm joking," he wrote. "Here's some proof." Attached was a photograph of his hand, missing the pinky finger. The quality of the image was poor, but the scar where his finger should have been was unmistakable. Scrawled across his palm, in barely legible handwriting, were the words, "Cash to cut off my leg." Below it, the date of the email was written. It was horrifying and fascinating all at once. Cash claimed he'd performed the amputation himself as a practice run for his ultimate goal. "It wasn't as bad as I expected," he said, as though discussing a minor inconvenience. He even included details about the tools he used and how he had stopped the bleeding. "Preparation is everything," he wrote, almost proudly. Then came the video. It arrived in my inbox with no subject line and no text in the body of the email. Just a single attachment. I shouldn't have opened it, I knew that much. But my curiosity overpowered my sense of self-preservation. The video showed a masked man, presumably Cash, holding a pair of bolt cutters. The act itself was quick, but the sound, the wet crunch of bone and flesh, was something I would never forget. When it was over, the camera zoomed in on his now missing finger. blood dripping onto the table beneath it. I couldn't sleep that night. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, telling myself it was fake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the weeks that followed, Cash and I exchanged sporadic emails. His stories grew darker, detailing his involvement in a small, secretive subculture of people obsessed with self-amputation. He recounted helping others achieve their goals, sometimes acting as a spotter during their procedures. One man, he said, had submerged his leg in ice for nearly 20 hours, effectively killing the tissue to force a hospital to amputate. He was so happy afterward. Cash wrote. Like he finally became who he was meant to be. Cash spoke of another incident where he provided moral support for a man amputating his genitals. I didn't do any of the cutting, he clarified, as though that made the story less grotesque. His nonchalance was chilling. These weren't just stories to him, they were milestones in a macabre journey. Despite my growing discomfort, I couldn't stop reading his emails. They were a grotesque train wreck, impossible to look away from. Each new detail pushed the boundaries of what I thought I could stomach. Yet, as horrifying as it all was, there was a part of me that was morbidly intrigued by the psychology behind it. What drove someone to such extremes? Could it ever truly satisfy them? Cash's final email arrived without warning. The subject line read, "Today's the day." It was short and to the point. I found someone willing to help. Don't try to talk me out of it. This is what I've wanted my entire life. Thank you for listening. And that was it. No follow-up. No confirmation that he had survived. Just silence. 4 weeks. I checked my inbox obsessively, hoping for some kind of update. Was he okay? Did the procedure go as planned? Or had his obsession finally led to tragedy? The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me with more questions than answers. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I couldn't help but imagine the worst. Did he bleed out on some stranger's kitchen floor? Did the tools he relied on fail him at the last moment? Or did he achieve his goal, only to realize too late the gravity of what he'd done? I'll never know what became of Cash. His emails stopped, but his stories remained, etched into my memory like scars. Even now, years later, I can't think about Craigslist without remembering him. It's a reminder of how little we know about the people we interact with online, and how dangerous that ignorance can be. The haunting silence left me with a lingering unease. But it wasn't the last time Craigslist would lead me down a path of horror. Sometimes, the danger isn't lurking in a stranger's twisted mind. Sometimes, it's waiting for you in the form of a beautiful smile and a too-good-to-be-true invitation. But as I learned next, appearances can be deceiving and deadly. Story 2, The Craigslist Honeypot. It all started with a single Craigslist ad, buried among the noise of apartment rentals, used furniture, and odd jobs. The post was simple, almost too simple, and that's what caught my attention. Looking for something casual. Just got out of a relationship and don't want anything serious. Message me if you're interested. No flowery language. No unnecessary details. Just a straight-to-the-point offer from someone who seemed genuinely interested in a low-pressure connection. Attached was a photo. She was stunning, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that exuded warmth and approachability. She looked like someone who didn't need Craigslist to find a date, which should have been my first red flag. But instead of questioning it, I was flattered. Why would someone like her choose me? I convinced myself it was fate. Taking a deep breath, I typed out a response, careful to strike the right balance of confidence and humor. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately. Her name was Sarah, and she had just gone through a messy breakup. She wasn't looking for anything serious, just some fun to distract her from the pain. It sounded believable. We exchanged messages throughout the day, and it didn't take long for the conversation to heat up. She sent a few more pictures, each one more provocative than the last, and I was hooked. She even suggested meeting up that evening. Her casual attitude and the way she seemed genuinely interested in me overrode any lingering doubts I had. "Is this real?" I finally asked, half-jokingly, hoping to mask my insecurity. She replied with a photo of herself holding a piece of paper with my name scrawled across it. The proof was undeniable. She gave me an address in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It sounded perfect, neutral territory where we could meet without the pressure of a public bar or restaurant. I could tell she had done this before because she made it sound so natural, so ordinary. That night, I pulled up to the address she provided. The house was modest but well kept, with a neatly trimmed lawn and a porch light glowing warmly in the twilight. For a moment, I felt my nerves subside. It looked like the kind of place where someone like Sarah would live. I called her to let her know I'd arrived, but she didn't answer. I tried again. Still nothing. A flicker of doubt crept in, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was getting ready and didn't have her phone on her. As I stepped out of my car and approached the house, a shadow shifted behind one of the windows. I stopped in my tracks. Two men were standing there, partially obscured by the curtains. They were watching me. The first man was burly, with a shaved head and a permanent scowl etched across his face. The second was wiry, with tattoos snaking up his arms and a jittery demeanor that set me on edge. They didn't move or say anything, just stared. Every hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Something wasn't right. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Maybe they were roommates? Friends of hers? I tried to rationalize the situation, but deep down, I knew better. The way they looked at me wasn't casual or curious. It was predatory. I forced myself to move, taking a step back toward my car. The front door opened, and my heart nearly stopped. A man stepped out, not Sarah, but a third guy I hadn't seen before. He was older, with a grizzled beard and cold eyes that gave nothing away. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, and smiled faintly, as if amused by my hesitation. "You here for Sarah?" he asked. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "She's inside," he said, gesturing toward the open door. Something about the way he said it, calm, detached, almost rehearsed, made my stomach churn. This wasn't right. None of it was right. I think I might have the wrong house," I stammered, taking another step back. The man's smile faltered for a split second before returning. "No, you've got the right place. Come on in." My instincts screamed at me to run. I mumbled an excuse about forgetting something in my car and turned on my heel. As I reached my car door, I heard the man call out, his tone light but laced with something sinister. "Leaving already? Thought you were here for some fun." I didn't respond. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man still standing on the porch, watching as I sped away. The two men from the window were now outside as well, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the encounter, dissecting every detail and imagining every possible outcome if I'd gone inside. By morning, I had convinced myself that I'd overreacted. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Sarah was real, and those men were just her friends or family. 2 days later, the news proved me wrong. The headline read, "Man attacked in Craigslist setup." The story detailed how a man had responded to an ad eerily similar to Sarah's. When he arrived at the same house I had visited, he wasn't so lucky. The 3 men ambushed him as soon as he stepped inside. They beat him, robbed him, and left him unconscious. The victim was discovered hours later by a neighbor who heard groaning from inside the house. He was rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. My blood ran cold as I read the article. The description of the house and the neighborhood matched perfectly. The realization hit me like a freight train: if I hadn't trusted my instincts and fled, I could have been that man. The experience left me shaken. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to being their victim. The ad wasn't just a prank or a scam, it was a calculated trap, designed to lure unsuspecting men into a nightmare. Even now, years later, I can't look at Craigslist without feeling a pang of unease. The platform is a breeding ground for anonymity. And with anonymity comes danger. Behind every ad, there's a person, and you can never truly know their intentions. Sometimes, I wonder how many other men fell for the same trap. How many weren't as lucky as I was? Craigslist is a strange and dangerous place, full of hidden horrors and anonymous predators. Sometimes, the danger is overt, like a house full of men waiting to ambush you. Other times, it's subtle, a cryptic message or an email exchange that seems harmless at first. And yet, curiosity always gets the better of us. That's what happened to me the day I stumbled across the ad with 3 chilling words: "I see you." Story 3, the "I see you" text. Craigslist has always been a place of curiosity, a strange, chaotic corner of the internet where people sell old furniture, trade odd jobs, and occasionally post things so bizarre that you wonder if they're even real. I was no stranger to its quirks. In fact, I often browsed Craigslist for entertainment, scrolling through listings for haunted dolls or laughably bad attempts at dating ads. It was a harmless habit, or so I thought. The day I stumbled upon the "I see you" ad, it felt like any other. I had just wrapped up work, craving something mindless to distract me. Scrolling through the gigs section, I came across the post: "Earn $100 by sending a text." Totally legit. Serious inquiries only. That was it. No details. No further explanation. Just a single, vague promise of easy money. At first, I scoffed. Another Craigslist scam, I thought. But something about the ad intrigued me. Maybe it was the sheer simplicity of it, the lack of any context. It was like a mystery begging to be solved. I couldn't help myself. I clicked on it. The full post didn't add much. It reiterated the promise of $100 and provided an email address, quickcashtext@gmail.com. Something about the name struck me as lazy, almost amateurish, which only made the ad feel more authentic. Scammers usually tried harder to sound convincing, right? Still, I wasn't naive. I assumed this was some phishing scheme or a bait-and-switch tactic. But the curiosity gnawed at me. Against my better judgment, I sent a quick email. "Hi. I saw your ad. Can you tell me more about the job?" The reply came almost immediately, which was the first thing that set me on edge. Thanks for reaching out. The task is simple. I'll provide you with a phone number and a short message to send. Once the message is delivered, I'll wire $100 to your account. It's as easy as that. There was no name, no signature, just the instructions. I reread the email, searching for any clues about the sender. The tone was cold and professional, devoid of any personality. It felt hollow. Still, I was hooked. I needed to know more. What's the message? I replied. The second reply took longer, as if the sender had taken time to deliver it. When it came, the answer was chillingly simple. I see you. I stared at the screen, the 3 words practically glaring back at me. My mind raced with questions. Who was this message for? What purpose could it possibly serve? On its own, it wasn't threatening, just ambiguous. But that ambiguity made it worse. I typed out another email, trying to keep my tone casual. Who's the recipient? This time, the response was curt. That's not your concern. Just send the message, and you'll get paid. A chill ran down my spine. Something about the insistence on anonymity felt wrong. Why would someone go to such lengths to avoid sending their own text? The whole thing reeked of something dark. But I couldn't put my finger on it. What if I say no? I replied, half expecting no response. But they did respond. And it came faster than ever. Then I'll find someone else. That line hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a threat. Not overtly. But it felt like one. I debated ending the correspondence there. But part of me was desperate to understand what this was. I wrote one last message. Why can't you send the message yourself? The reply was immediate and chilling in its simplicity. I prefer to remain anonymous. That was it. That was all they said. After that, I didn't reply. I flagged the ad on Craigslist and deleted the email thread. For the rest of the evening, I tried to forget about it, convincing myself it was just another scam. But the next day, curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to Craigslist to check on the ad. It was gone. At first, I felt relieved. Craigslist moderators must have removed it, I told myself. But something about its absence felt off. Craigslist wasn't known for its swift moderation. Ads stayed up for weeks, sometimes months, even when flagged multiple times. What if the ad wasn't taken down by moderators? What if someone had actually responded, taken the job, and sent the message? The thought made my skin crawl. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was the recipient of the text? What would they think or do when they saw it? Maybe it was just a prank, a cruel joke to unnerve someone. Or maybe it was something more sinister, a signal, a warning, or even a threat. I imagined the worst-case scenarios. A stalker using the message to terrify their victim. A criminal marking their next target. The possibilities were endless, each more unsettling than the last. A few days later, I stumbled upon an online forum dedicated to Craigslist horror stories. One thread caught my eye: weird ad, earn $100 to send a text. The post was written by someone who had responded to an ad almost identical to the one I had seen. According to the poster, they'd taken the job out of curiosity. The process was exactly as described. They received a phone number, sent the text, and were promptly paid. But then things took a dark turn. The poster described receiving strange calls in the middle of the night, calls where no one spoke. But they could hear faint breathing on the other end. They also claimed to have seen a shadowy figure outside their house, watching from a distance. The thread exploded with comments, some accusing the poster of fabricating the story, others sharing similar experiences. One person claimed that after sending the text, they'd been followed for weeks by an unknown car. Another said they'd received threatening messages, warning them to mind their own business. Reading these accounts made my blood run cold. I thought about how close I'd come to taking the job, how easily I could have been in their position. To this day, I don't know what the "I see you" text was really about. Was it a prank? A scam? Or something far more sinister? What haunts me the most is the possibility that someone acted on it. Someone sent that text. And somewhere out there, the recipient read those 3 words, "I see you." What happened after that? Did it end with a simple laugh? Or did it spiral into something darker? I'll never know. And maybe that's for the best. But every now and then, when I'm up late at night and the house is quiet, I find myself staring out the window, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, watching. Craigslist is a strange and unpredictable place, where the line between the mundane and the macabre blurs far too easily. Sometimes, the danger comes in the form of a cryptic text message. Other times, it wears a more familiar guise, like the promise of help when you're desperate. That's what happened to a couple searching for their lost dog. And what they found was far from comforting. Story 4, The Lost Dog and the Trap. Oscar wasn't just a pet, he was family. A tiny Jack Russell Terrier with more energy than seemed physically possible. He came into our lives as a bundle of fur and chaos. We had adopted him early in our relationship, seeing him as a trial run for parenthood, at least. That was the joke we told our friends. But Oscar was more than that. He was a companion, a source of constant joy, and, at times, a tiny, furry tornado that turned our lives upside down. He had one quirk, though, his obsession with the rats that lived near the dumpsters behind our apartment building. Being a terrier, Oscar was hardwired for the hunt, and the scent of those rats sent him into a frenzy. He'd bark furiously, tug at his leash, and do everything in his power to chase them down. It got so bad that we stopped taking him out back, worried he'd escape and bolt across the busy street nearby. That's why the morning we woke up to find the back door open and Oscar gone was nothing short of devastating. My boyfriend had come home late the night before, a little drunk, and hadn't latched the door properly. At some point during the night, Oscar must have sniffed out his chance. Whether he'd found a gap in the fence or leapt over it in his pursuit of rats, we didn't know. All we knew was that he was gone. The moment we realized he was missing, we were out the door, calling his name and scouring the neighborhood. We checked the park, the alleys, the nearby yards, everywhere we thought a curious little dog might go. I printed out flyers, plastering them on telephone poles and slipping them into mailboxes. My boyfriend knocked on doors, asking our neighbors if they'd seen him. The hours turned into a day. Then 2. Every time my phone buzzed, I held my breath, hoping it was someone calling to say they'd found him. But the phone stayed stubbornly silent. On the 3rd day, my boyfriend suggested posting an ad on Craigslist. People use it for lost pets all the time, he said. I was skeptical. But at this point, I was willing to try anything. The ad was simple. Oscar is a small Jack Russell Terrier. white with brown spots. Last seen near our address. He's very friendly and answers to his name. If you've seen him or found him, please contact us immediately. $200 reward for his safe return. I attached a picture of Oscar. His bright eyes and perky ears practically begging the viewer to help us. Hitting post felt like sending a message in a bottle out into the vast, unpredictable sea of the internet. The response came 2 days later. Hi. I found a small dog wandering near the highway a couple of nights ago. My friend saw your Craigslist post and sent me the link. I'm pretty sure it's your dog. He even responds to the name Oscar. Please call me at phone number so we can arrange to return him. I read the email aloud to my boyfriend, barely able to contain my excitement. Could it really be that easy? I dialed the number immediately. The man who answered sounded older, with a gravelly voice and an unhurried way of speaking. He told me he'd found Oscar by the side of the road, looking frightened but unharmed. He'd brought him home, fed him some cooked chicken, and made a leash out of rope to take him for walks. He's a sweet little guy, the man said. But I figured someone must be missing him. My friend saw your ad and told me about it. Tears of relief welled up in my eyes. I couldn't believe it. Oscar was safe. The man gave us his address and told us we could come by that evening to pick him up. I thanked him profusely, barely able to get the words out through my overwhelming gratitude. But something he said at the end of the call gave me pause. He's in my basement, the man added. Just so you know. I mentioned it to my boyfriend after I hung up. Why would he keep him in the basement? Maybe he's worried about messes, I said, trying to reassure myself. Oscar isn't exactly house-trained. But my boyfriend didn't seem convinced. If he's taking him on walks, why keep him downstairs? And did you notice the address? That's not a great part of town. He wasn't wrong. The neighborhood the man had described was notorious for its rundown houses and crime. Still, I couldn't imagine someone going to the trouble of luring us out there just for a scam, or worse. I wanted to believe the man was just eccentric but well-meaning. Even so, my boyfriend insisted on coming with me. The sun was setting as we drove to the address. The streets became increasingly desolate. The houses more and more run down. Many of them had boarded-up windows or yards overgrown with weeds. By the time we reached the house, I was starting to feel a knot of unease in my stomach. The house was in bad shape. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged under its own weight. And the yard was a tangle of knee-high grass and trash. A single light bulb above the door flickered faintly, casting eerie shadows across the facade. A man stood in the doorway, waving at us. He looked ordinary enough, mid-40s. Wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, but something about him felt off. His smile was too wide, too forced. You must be here for Oscar, he said. His voice gruff but friendly. Come on in. He's downstairs. The smell hit me as we stepped onto the porch, damp air mixed with something faintly metallic. My boyfriend hesitated, his hand brushing mine. Can you bring him up? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's smile faltered for a split second before returning. It's easier if you just come in, he said. I glanced at my boyfriend, who gave me a subtle shake of his head. We'll wait out here, my boyfriend said firmly. The man's demeanor shifted. His eyes grew colder, and his tone lost its friendliness. Suit yourself, he said, disappearing back into the house. Minutes passed. We stood on the porch, the silence stretching uncomfortably. My boyfriend checked his watch, his jaw tight. "We're leaving," he whispered. Just as we turned to go, the man reappeared in the doorway. His face was blank now, his eyes hard. "Not coming in after all?" he asked flatly. "No," my boyfriend replied, steering me toward the car. The man said nothing as we got in the car and drove away. But I could feel his eyes on us until we turned the corner. When we got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly avoided something terrible. The next morning, I searched the address online. The house had been foreclosed 3 years ago. It wasn't supposed to be occupied. My stomach dropped. I called the police, reporting the incident and the address. A week later, an officer called me back, his tone grave. They'd investigated the house and found something, though he wouldn't tell me what. All he said was, "You're lucky you didn't go inside. We never found Oscar." The guilt of leaving him behind still eats at me. But so does the fear of what might have happened if we'd stepped through that door. Craigslist is a strange and dangerous place, where the line between help and harm is often blurred. Sometimes, desperation drives us to trust strangers. Other times, it's the lure of a deal too good to be true, like the man who thought he was buying a PS3, only to find himself staring down the barrel of a gun. Story 5: The PS3 Setup. Craigslist was a strange but reliable friend. Over the years, I'd bought and sold all kinds of things on the platform: furniture, concert tickets, even a used bike. Sure, the site had its quirks, with a mix of sketchy ads and badly written posts. But I'd never had a bad experience. It was the kind of place where you'd expect to find hidden gems if you were willing to dig. So, when my little cousin accidentally fried my PlayStation 3 by spilling Mountain Dew all over it, Craigslist was the first place I turned. I wasn't about to drop hundreds of dollars on a new console. Not with the holidays draining my bank account. I needed a deal. And Craigslist was full of them. Scrolling through listings, I spotted it almost immediately. It sounded almost too good to be true. I clicked on the ad, half expecting to find a catch. But the description seemed legitimate. The seller claimed they were offloading the console to cover rent and wanted it gone that night. "Text me if interested," the post concluded, with a number at the bottom. Something about the timing, the urgency, gave me pause. But the idea of snagging a PS3 for just $100 was hard to resist. After a moment of deliberation, I sent a quick text. "Hey, I'm interested in the PS3. Is it still available?" The reply came within minutes. "Yeah. Still got it. Can you meet tonight?" I asked for the location, and the response was, "Old Kmart parking lot. Around 8 p.m. Immediately, a small warning bell went off in my head. The Kmart he mentioned had been closed for years. The parking lot was empty most of the time. A ghostly relic of what used to be a bustling shopping center. Still, I reasoned, people use parking lots for meetups all the time. Maybe he didn't want strangers coming to his house. That made sense, didn't it? I told myself it was fine and agreed to meet. The rest of the evening felt surreal. As I drove to the parking lot, snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, illuminated by my headlights. The streets were quiet, eerily so, and the cold made everything feel sharper, more present. When I arrived, the parking lot was almost completely empty, save for a single car parked at the far end. Its headlights were off, and a man stood leaning against the driver's side door, his hood pulled up against the chill. The sight unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I told myself to stop overthinking. Craigslist wasn't exactly known for polished professionals. This was probably just someone down on their luck, selling what they could to get by. Taking a deep breath, I pulled into a spot a few feet away and rolled down my window. "You here for the PS3?" the man called out. His voice was low and gravelly, muffled slightly by the scarf wrapped around his face. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "You have it with you?" "It's in the back," he said, gesturing toward his car. "Come check it out." I hesitated. Something about the situation felt off. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact or the fact that he hadn't moved from his spot, as if waiting for me to come closer. "Do you mind bringing it over here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man shook his head. "It's easier if you just take a look yourself." Against my better judgment, I got out of the car. The snow crunched under my boots as I approached his vehicle. He stepped aside, motioning to the back seat. The box was there, just as he'd said, with the familiar PS3 logo printed across the top. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I opened the box, my stomach dropped. Inside wasn't a PlayStation 3. It was an old, dusty DVD player. The kind you'd find at a garage sale for a couple of bucks. "What the hell is this?" I asked, turning to him. That's when I realized how close he'd gotten. Before I could react, he pulled a gun from his waistband and pointed it at my chest. "Hand over the cash," he said, his voice steady and cold. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "I don't have it," I stammered, trying to buy time. "Don't lie to me," he snapped, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I'm not asking again." My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket, pulling out the envelope of cash. Slowly, I tossed it into his car. "There," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take it." For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Someone was crouched in the driver's seat of his car, watching us intently. Another man, hidden in the shadows, waiting. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a robbery. The man with the gun motioned toward his car door. "Get in," he ordered. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to get out of there before things escalated further. Without thinking, I turned and bolted toward my car. "Hey," he shouted, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The rear window of my car shattered as I dove inside, glass spraying across the back seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Another shot rang out as I floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the icy pavement. I didn't stop driving until I was halfway across town, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. The shattered glass in my back seat was a grim reminder of how close I'd come to something far worse than losing $100. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face. The cold, detached look in his eyes as he pointed the gun at me. I couldn't stop thinking about the second man, hidden in the shadows. What would have happened if I'd gotten into that car? The thought made my skin crawl. I never reported the incident. What would I even say? I didn't have a license plate number. And I doubted the police would take a Craigslist robbery seriously. Instead, I spent the next few days trying to put it out of my mind. Though the fear lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Since then, I've stayed far away from Craigslist. Some deals aren't worth the risk, no matter how tempting they seem. Sometimes, the dangers of the internet are obvious: a stranger with a gun, a setup designed to trap you. But other times, the threat is more insidious, lurking behind a screen, hidden in plain sight. Like the time I stumbled upon a live stream that seemed innocent at first, until it wasn't. Story 6, The Smiling Man live stream. It started the way so many late nights do, me idly scrolling through forums, looking for something to pass the time. I wasn't in the mood for movies or games, and my usual social media feed felt stale. Instead, I fell into a rabbit hole of threads about strange and unexplained internet oddities. Most of the posts were the usual fluff: rumors about haunted websites, bizarre YouTube channels, or creepy ARGs. Then, buried deep in the thread, I found it, a single link accompanied by a cryptic caption. Live feed, smiling man, watch if you dare. No other context. No comments. Just the link staring at me like a dare. I hesitated. Clicking on random links was risky at best and idiotic at worst. But curiosity has a way of overriding caution. Before I could talk myself out of it, I clicked. The page loaded quickly, revealing a live stream in stark, almost surreal clarity. The scene was simple but deeply unsettling. A man sat in the center of an empty room, illuminated by harsh, flickering fluorescent lights. He was staring directly into the camera, his lips stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. His eyes, unblinking and glassy, seemed to follow me no matter where I looked on the screen. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd see in family photos or awkward school pictures. This was something else entirely, a grin too wide, too forced, as though his face had been stretched into position by invisible hands. The corners of his mouth curved upward at an impossible angle, and his teeth gleamed unnaturally white. For a moment, I thought the stream was frozen. The man didn't move a muscle. He just sat there, staring and smiling. I glanced at the chat window beside the video feed. It was empty. No usernames. No messages. Just a blinking cursor waiting for someone to say something. I realized I might be the only person watching. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The man didn't blink. Didn't twitch. Didn't shift in his seat. The room around him was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional crackle of static from the audio feed. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this a performance? Some kind of avant-garde art piece? Or was it just a weird looped video designed to creep people out? But then I noticed something. The man's chest was rising and falling ever so slightly. He was breathing. The longer I watched, the more oppressive the silence became. It felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though the room itself were holding its breath. My own breathing grew shallow, matching the rhythm of the man on the screen. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like a footstep on old wooden floorboards. The sound was so soft I thought I might have imagined it. But as I strained to listen, it came again. Louder this time. It wasn't coming from my apartment. It was coming from the stream. The man in the chair didn't react. His eyes remained locked on the camera, his smile unchanging. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone, or something, was in the room with him. The creaks continued. Slow and deliberate. Growing louder with each step. I leaned closer to the screen. My pulse quickening. Then I saw it, a shadow flickering across the far wall. Just barely visible in the corner of the frame. It moved with a strange, jerky rhythm. Like someone pacing back and forth just out of view. The man in the chair didn't flinch. I wanted to say something. To type a warning into the empty chat box. But my fingers froze over the keyboard. It was as though some unspoken rule held me back. A primal instinct telling me to stay silent. The footsteps stopped. Replaced by a low, indistinct whisper. I couldn't make out the words. But the tone was unmistakably human, soft. Almost conversational. As if the speaker were trying not to be overheard. I glanced at the man in the chair. Expecting him to react. But he remained perfectly still. His grin unwavering. Minutes dragged by. Each one heavier than the last. The whispers faded. Replaced by a new sound, a metallic scrape. Sharp and deliberate. Like metal against stone. Then, from the edge of the frame, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a silhouette. Blurry and distorted by the camera's harsh lighting. But as it stepped into full view, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was a man. Dressed in dark clothes. His face obscured by a black ski mask. In his hands, he held a sledgehammer. He moved cautiously. His posture tense. His eyes scanning the room. He didn't seem to notice the camera, or if he did, he didn't care. The intruder stopped a few feet away from the man in the chair. Tilting his head as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He waved a hand in front of the smiling man's face. But there was no response. What the hell? I whispered to myself. My voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The intruder leaned closer. His grip on the sledgehammer tightening. For a moment, it seemed like he was debating whether to use it. Then, everything changed. The smiling man's eyes shifted, just a flicker. A split-second movement that was almost imperceptible. But it was enough. The intruder froze. His body going rigid. Slowly, the man in the chair began to move. It wasn't a natural movement. His limbs jerked and twisted as though pulled by invisible strings. His head tilted sharply to one side. And his grin widened to an impossible degree. The corners of his mouth stretching far beyond what should have been physically possible. The intruder stumbled back. His breathing audible through the stream's audio feed. "What the fuck?" he shouted. His voice breaking. The smiling man's head snapped toward him with a sickening crack. His unblinking eyes locking onto the intruder. The man dropped the sledgehammer and bolted out of frame. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the feed. Followed by silence. The smiling man slowly turned back to the camera. His grin as wide and unnatural as ever. I sat there. Paralyzed. My hands gripping the edges of my desk. My mind raced. Trying to process what I'd just seen. Was the smiling man a victim? A decoy? Or something far more sinister? I watched the stream for a few more minutes. Hoping for answers. But nothing changed. The man in the chair remained as he had been, still. Silent. And smiling. Eventually, I closed the tab. The image of his grotesque grin burned into my mind. The next day, I tried to find the stream again. But the link was gone. No forums mentioned it. And no search terms brought it back. It was as if the entire thing had vanished. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me just as intently as I was watching the stream. Late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows seem to move on their own, I find myself thinking of the smiling man. I'll never know who he was, or why he was there. But one thing is certain, some corners of the internet are best left unexplored. Sometimes, the horrors of the internet are fleeting, vanishing into digital oblivion. But other times, they leave lasting scars, echoes that linger in the real world. Like the story of a child whose presence twisted reality into something far darker. That's a story I wish I hadn't read. Yet it's one I'll never forget. Story 7, The Manipulative Child. It began with a flickering screen. A young father, eager to ensure the safety of his newborn, had recently set up a baby monitor with a video feed. Like any new parent, he used it as a reassurance, proof that his baby was peacefully asleep. But what he saw on that monitor one cold night in 2007 would shatter his sense of security and set off a chain of events that unearthed horrors far beyond anything he could have imagined. Instead of his sleeping baby, the screen displayed something nightmarish. In a dimly lit cellar, a boy no older than 6 or 7 sat trembling on the floor. His small frame was bound with thick ropes, his face streaked with dirt and tears. The surroundings were grim, cold concrete walls, a bare floor, and dim lighting that barely illuminated the scene. The boy's muffled sobs broke through the static, faint but unmistakable. The father froze, unable to look away. His first thought was that the monitor had picked up interference from another device nearby. But that did little to comfort him. If what he was seeing was real, then somewhere close by, a child was suffering unimaginably. His heart pounding. He grabbed his phone and called the police. The authorities arrived quickly, their skepticism giving way to alarm as the father showed them the live feed. With no way to determine the source of the signal, they began canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking questions. Eventually, their search brought them to a nondescript house belonging to 2 sisters, Clara and Katerina Maurova. Clara, a single mother, lived there with her 2 young sons, Jakub and Andrei, as well as a recently adopted 13-year-old girl named Anna. The sisters welcomed the police inside, their smiles strained but polite. When asked about a cellar, Clara hesitated before leading the officers to the kitchen, where a trapdoor lay hidden beneath a faded rug. What the police found when they opened that door would haunt them forever. The cellar was dark, damp, and suffocatingly small. And there, in the corner, was Jakub, bound, gagged, and visibly malnourished. The boy's wide, terrified eyes filled with tears as the officers freed him from his restraints. His skin was pale, his body frail, and he clung to one of the officers as though he were holding on to life itself. The sisters were taken in for questioning, their explanations riddled with contradictions and bizarre justifications. Clara, sobbing and visibly distraught, insisted that Jakub's punishment was necessary. Anna said it was the only way to cleanse him, she explained, her voice cracking. He had to be purified of his sins. Anna, meanwhile, sat quietly in the corner of the interrogation room, her wide eyes filled with innocence. She looked like a frightened child, a victim herself, clutching a stuffed bear. She gazed at the officers with an expression that was equal parts confusion and fear. The more the sisters talked, the clearer it became that Anna was no ordinary 13-year-old. She's wise beyond her years. Clara said, her voice trembling with conviction. She knows things I can't understand. We trust her. Under Anna's guidance, the sisters had subjected Jakub and his younger brother Andre to horrific abuse. They were starved, beaten, and restrained for days at a time. Anna had convinced Clara and Katerina that these punishments were acts of divine will, necessary for the boys' salvation. She told us it was the only way to save their souls. Katerina whispered, her voice barely audible. Jakub's testimony painted an even darker picture. Through tears, he recounted how Anna had orchestrated the abuse with chilling precision. But the most horrifying revelation came when Jakub revealed what Anna had done to him. She cut me, he said, his small voice trembling. She took pieces of my skin and made them eat it. The investigators were horrified. But their questions about Anna only deepened the mystery. She had been adopted by Clara several months prior. But her paperwork was vague at best. The orphanage listed as her place of origin didn't exist. And no one could provide concrete details about her background. Despite her apparent age, Anna displayed an uncanny ability to manipulate those around her. She spoke with authority and eloquence far beyond her years, often convincing adults to see her as a figure of wisdom rather than a child. As the investigation continued, small inconsistencies in Anna's story began to surface. Her mannerisms, her speech, and even her physical appearance didn't quite match the profile of a 13-year-old girl. And then, during a routine search of the Maurova home, officers found a passport hidden among Anna's belongings. The name on the document wasn't Anna. It was Barbara Skrylova, a 33-year-old woman with a rare medical condition that stunted her physical growth. Barbara wasn't a child at all. Barbara's deception stunned everyone involved. For months, she had lived as Anna, seamlessly integrating herself into the Maurova family and manipulating them into committing unspeakable acts. Further investigation revealed that Barbara had a long history of infiltrating families by posing as a vulnerable child. Her small stature and youthful appearance made it easy for her to gain sympathy and trust. But Barbara's motives were far more sinister than mere manipulation. Police uncovered evidence linking her to a secretive cult known as the Grail Movement, which preached extreme forms of spiritual cleansing and purification. Barbara's role within the cult was unclear, but it was evident that she had used its teachings to justify her actions. The Maurova sisters, desperate for purpose and validation, had fallen completely under Barbara's control. She had preyed on their insecurities, convincing them that their abuse of Jakub and Andre was part of a divine plan. Barbara's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. But her capture was only the beginning of the story. After fleeing the Maurova home, she had traveled to Poland, where she once again posed as a child, this time as a 14-year-old boy named Adam. By the time authorities caught up with her, she had already begun integrating herself into a new family. The realization that Barbara could so easily manipulate her way into another household was chilling. It wasn't just her ability to deceive, it was the precision with which she identified vulnerable people and exploited their weaknesses. Barbara's trial became a media circus, with every gruesome detail of her crimes laid bare for the world to see. But even as she sat in court, her expression remained calm, almost serene. She showed no remorse. Barbara's story is one of the most horrifying and baffling cases of modern times, not just because of the physical and emotional torment she inflicted, but because of what she represents. Her actions forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones who wear the guise of innocence. We like to think we can spot danger, that we can protect ourselves and our loved ones from harm. But what happens when the danger looks like a child? Barbara Skrlova's story is a reminder that real-life horrors often surpass anything we could imagine in fiction. It's not just the cruelty of her actions that lingers, it's the chilling knowledge that someone like her could be out there, waiting for their next family to prey upon. As the video concludes, let this story serve as a haunting reminder of the hidden dangers that lurk in everyday life. Whether it's a manipulative stranger or a seemingly innocent Craigslist ad, the line between trust and terror is thinner than we'd like to believe. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of the most chilling tales the internet has to offer. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Wolf Tells for more stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in the dark. They're the ones standing right in front of us.